The following video contains language that may be inappropriate for young viewers. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Welcome to Behind the Bars, where we bring the unseen and the unheard stories from the depths of the prison system to the forefront. I'm your host, Jason Boss, and together we'll explore the madness, the chaos, and the harsh realities hidden behind the steel doors of prisons worldwide. From the local jailhouse to death row across the world, we'll show you the isolation, the seclusion, and the decades spent enduring unimaginable conditions. These are the stories of survival, struggle, and humanity in places most of us will never see. We're here to shine a light on what society often forgets, the voices of the incarcerated. Each story is real, each voice is authentic, and every moment reveals the raw, unfiltered truth of life behind the bars. Join me for a journey like no other, a journey into the darkness, the truth, and the resilience of the human spirit. This is Behind the Bars, real life, real stories. Welcome to Behind the Bars. I'm your host, Jason Boss, and today we're stepping into the Wild West, modern-day Tombstone, Arizona, where the legends of outlaws and shootouts are still alive in unexpected ways. This isn't a movie. It's the real-life story of Barry Chappell. Barry is serving a natural life sentence in prison for a shootout straight out of the Old West, fueled by a dangerous cocktail of methamphetamine, drugs, and a delusion. Barry's story is one of a gunfight over a woman, a deadly showdown with Leroy that left Leroy dead and Barry behind bars for life. But Barry's story is more than just a shootout. It's a look into the mind of a man consumed by a lifestyle that led him to make a fateful choice. A choice that changed his life forever. Barry Chappell may have been sentenced to life, but today, he's sharing his story with Behind the Bars. From Tombstone, Arizona to a lifetime in prison, this is his tale of regret, survival, and reflection. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Barry Chappell, and these are his stories.
All right, brothers and sisters, friends and family, I have with me a good friend of mine. His name is Barry Chappell. And if you guys have not watched the very first podcast that we have done, I encourage you guys to go and take a look at this podcast. On the phone with me right now is my friend Barry Chappell. Barry, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm much better, thank you, sir.
It has been about a month since you and I have had the opportunity to sit and chat, and we have posted this podcast out there. And for those who have not seen it, guys, go and see it. It's extremely exciting. It's about an hour and 12 minutes, somewhere around there, and it will tell you everything before these moments. Now, Barry, we heard everything all the way to the moment that you shot Lightning Leroy. You looked over at this lady, and she had asked you, she had basically said, how do you feel? And you said it was a good moment. What happened?
Yeah, she said, well, do you feel better now? And I said, hell yeah. Because I was relieved. I thought I went there and, somebody was going to die. That was just the way it was, and I figured it would be me because I figured he'd be ready and waiting.
And in your mind, you were doing the right thing. You were protecting a person that you had been more than likely manipulated with to somehow execute some judgment upon Leroy. Is that what you would say?
That's what I found out over the years since I've been incarcerated.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, I felt what you would call justified, I suppose. But, yeah, after the interviews started coming in and the transcripts of the detective interviews, I got to piecing together that I was probably manipulated the majority of the story. So there's the questions that's never going to be answered in this lifetime for sure.
Right. All right. So you just do the shooting. Take me through the very first 24 hours of right out of the gate, all of your experiences, because to this point, you had never been arrested before. Is that correct?
I'd been arrested in the early 80s for a DUI.
Okay.
I spent 3 days in jail until I saw the judge.
Okay.
And that was it.
Okay, so take me through the moments after Leroy's down and you're walking, you come out of your little what you called, I think, before kind of like a blackout. What happens?
Well, after I talked to the lady, I was walking back from a truck, and she asked me that, and I said, "Yeah, I feel better." And I got in the truck, and the fellow who was with me, he was stunned, of course, in shock. And I looked over at him. I said, "Me and Frank just burned him down." Of course, I'm cowboyed up, so I'm speaking the lingo. And that started taking me into the part where I started back my rational mind again, I suppose. So I knew that the marshals in town knew me well because I did shows, and they knew that whenever I was walking around town, I had a loaded gun on me, which was legal in Arizona, still is, as far as I know. Mm-hmm. So I knew I had to get uptown, because if they rolled up on me, it's going to be shoot first and ask questions later. Mm-hmm. So I go straight over 2 blocks, park my vehicle, take my gun belt off, put gun belt on top of the hood of the truck where people could see it, and walked into a place right across from the Birdcage Theater, which was like a little gift shop. And I told the lady at the counter, I said, "Call the law. I just killed a fella." I said, "I'll be out front smoking a cigarette waiting on him." So I just casually walked out the door, and I guess she was probably in shock too. According to the interview, she thought I was kidding till she, could see that I wasn't. So basically, I stood out front, so I started seeing the cop cars go flying. Then I guess someone was watching over me. I see the only marshal in town, which he was kind of like a patrol officer. He did, like, whenever snakes and such as that would be in town, he would take care of it like the animal control officer. But he rolled up by, and I walked there, threw my hands in there. And this is right on Allen Street, 1 o'clock. Tourists are seeing me walking there with my hands up. I don't know if they thought it was part of the show, but I walked straight up to the vehicle. He don't even cuff me because he knows me. He just throws me in the back. I said, "They're looking for me." It was chaos there, of course. I was sitting in the cell within 15 minutes after this.
So you're riding in the back of the car with this guy unhandcuffed right to the station?
Yeah, it was only a block away.
And
a small town.
Right. Okay. And so basically, you get to the station, then what?
Well, they carry me back in there. Of course, they're just rolling up on the crime scene, trying to start putting it together, Mm-hmm. And probably, I would guess, a half hour, 45 minutes later, I'm sitting in there, and then the detectives had shown up. They come over and could ask me some questions. I said, "No, I don't think I will. I think I've said enough." So I basically just took a nap then until they woke me up a few hours later, when they threw me in back of another car and laid me down on the seat. I was thinking, this is kind of strange. Of course, I'm cuffed up then. And they carried me down to the county jail, which was probably about 30 miles to the south of Bisbee. Mm-hmm. And I got to figuring out later, I said, that's kind of strange. They would lay me down on the back seat, and there's only one deputy that carried me down there. So apparently the whole town was in uproar. And you got to remember, this is a town too tough to die. And it's still the Wild West in that town. The rumor was they were going to try to bust me out of jail and lynch me. And I heard that years later from my wife. But this town, I was asked one day by a couple, they said, "What's it like living here?" I said, "Well, it's a combination of the Twilight Zone and Disneyland. It's pretty much fantasy." And that's the way it was. When you start looking at what I was doing, gunfighting and ghost hunting, then you get the mixing in sorcery, which you know what sorcery involves. Mm-hmm. That's basically you're calling on the supernatural to affect the natural, you know, and that's not good.
Absolutely not.
That's why I always called him my companion. My wife called him the Cowboy. It was like an alter personality, but he was a real good gunfighter. So I'd always tell him, Frank, we got a show to do. Get ready. That's why I told that fellow that me and Frank just burned him down. Because as far as I knew, he was still with me. Of course, we know that's familiar spirits.
So when you
at the time, I thought it was actually a person, but I've learned that since I've gotten into my scripture, it was probably a demonic entity.
All right, let's go back to that. So you before this, you said you got in the truck with Frank. Is that what you said, or something?
Well, I told the guy that had drove up with me in my truck. He was sitting there. He witnessed the whole thing.
And who was this guy?
He just looked over.
And who was this guy?
The guy that was sitting in front of me was a friend of mine. He knew me. He just happened to be in the vehicle when I found him that day.
Did you tell him what you were about to do?
He knew what I was doing, because I was looking for Leroy.
And why did he choose to stay in the car when he knew that Leroy was going to get mowed down?
You'd have to ask him that. It was quite common. See, I carried a gun all the time. Whenever you go, when you're a local and you go to town, they want you to be in period costume, you know, for the tourist.
I see.
I was always in character.
I want to touch on one thing real quick. I had a question on the guy that you picked up that was in the truck. You had been hunting.
With me.
Yeah, with you. How long was he in the truck prior to this? How long had you guys been driving around looking for Leroy?
5 minutes, maybe.
So you just picked this guy up and told him you were going to go get Leroy, and he just hung around?
Well, you have to understand, all this happened from my house to where I found him to jail is in a quarter-mile circle. This town is very small. When I left home that day, I went straight downtown, and I went to that woman for the second time that day. I said, look, I'm fixing to go find Leroy. If you don't tell me this is not true, he's dead man, or I'm a dead man.
And what did she say?
Do it for the second time. She would deny or she would confirm it.
Was she crying? What was her demeanor when she told you?
She was kind of indifferent. I said, okay. That tells me what I need to know. And I started walking out the door, and she said, well, I'll see you later. And that kind of struck me as odd, because I was either going to be dead or in jail in a few minutes. But as soon as I left her, I run into this guy's name was Jason also. I picked Jason up, and he said, where are we going? I said, well, I'm going over to Leroy's house. I'm fixing to shoot him. And I guess he didn't know, because I always had a gun on me anyway, so it wasn't nothing unusual for me to have my gun on. So I get over there at his house, and he's not there, and I turn, and I go down the street, and I see him sitting in front of Laura's house. That's where I found him, and that's where this took place. Then I drove 2 blocks over.
Okay, so let's zip back. And you said you called upon a supernatural, almost like a demon. Is that what you would say this thing was before the gunfight?
At the time, I'd been ghost hunting for 6 years, and I considered it what's called the spirits of people who had passed on that had unfinished business that hadn't crossed over. And I figured it was a gunfighter that was doing these shows with me, because I've been doing shows for almost 3 years at this time. And the very first show I did in OK Corral 3 years earlier, this entity kind of stepped in and helped me do this gun work, and I wasn't even aware I was doing. I was doing the fast draw and quartering it back in the holster without thinking about it. In fact, whenever she asked me that question after I shot Leroy, she said, do you feel better now? And I remember I was coming back in my step, and I said, hell yeah, and I twirled the gun back in my holster. I wore a cross draw. And That's when I just stepped in the truck and drove away.
So,
But
for how many years did you
3 years.
call upon the gunfighter spirit, or when did you find this thing? How did that go down? Was it when you first started working at this OK Corral? And is the OK Corral possibly possessed? Is there some weird unclean spirits there?
Well, there was 3 men shot there. You know, that died, and that thing was gunfight. And whenever the shows, after the show that we did, I would actually lay on the ground for 2 songs. And while they did photographs, had the fake tombstone behind me and everything. I can send you a picture if you like. It showed me laying there in front of Frank McClory's tombstone.
Mm-hmm.
He was one of the men killed in the gunfight. Well, I figured it was Frank. That's why I played him in the gunfight. I did the gunfight probably 100 times in 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
You figured laying on that ground for Ghost Riders in the Sky and Bob Dylan's Knocking on Heaven's Door. That adds up to a few hours laying on the same ground these men laid on when they were dead. I figured it was Frank's spirit because I played him in the show.
Wow.
So after that first show I did, and he did the gun work, I always said Frank about the show. But I did actually shows out of town at the Dude Ranch, and I did shows on the street for the town, and I even got out at another place doing gunfights that burned down the next day, so I wasn't there but one day.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I've been calling on the spirit for almost 3 years to help me do these gunfights. My wife could actually see a shadow figure sometimes.
And how did
She
you?
called him the Cowboy.
So you had basically. Did you see that shadow that she called the Cowboy? Did you know? Did you feel this thing?
I never saw him, but I would have like little memory lapses, and she would tell me that I would speak different phrases, and I would even walk differently. And she would tell me some days she didn't know who would come home, me or the Cowboy. It freaked her out pretty good.
And how did you summon this thing for your shows?
Oh, it wasn't hard. I believe the scriptures call them familiar spirits. I believe it's because they latch on to people who are familiar with that lifestyle. Let's say I'm doing gunfights, and he was a gunfighter in his lifetime. Those skills, somebody that had those kind of skills like I did, I carried a gun all my life, and I was very proficient with it, let's say. And he just latched on to me that first show I did in the crowd. And I just, each time after that, you got to remember, I had been ghost hunting for years. I wasn't afraid of it. You know, I'd spoken to entities that you couldn't see in the room with you. I had spirit boxes, you know, digital recorders, night vision cameras, all that stuff.
All right.
Well versed in the paranormal.
Okay, so let's. I think that's a good podcast in of itself, because I think that would bring a lot of light to the occult. So let's head back into, you were down face on the car. They basically put you in there so that the town didn't shoot you, and then you were driven to the county jail in Tombstone.
Mm-hmm.
And then how did that go down? What's everything that from that moment on?
Well, when I got there, they said I was sitting on this bench right in front of like a little counter. I guess how they were booking, where they booked you in.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting there, and this officer walks in. Of course, I'm cowboyed up, you know, my clothes, boots, and all that stuff. Yeah. And he says, "You must be the guy from Tombstone." I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, what'd you shoot him for?" And forgive my French, but I said he's a rapist and a cocksucker. So I actually told this cop that without thinking, you know, because I'm still kind of, out of my normal self, let's say. And after that, I go into a cell literally I guess we call a holding cell. I stayed there for like 3 days before I got my own cell.
And what was the holding cell like? Can you describe what it was like your first day? I mean,
basically it was just they took all my clothes and they give you the classic striped, horizontal stripe outfits you would see on TV sometimes. Mm-hmm. And I slept on it looked like a big surfboard, but it was just a plastic something. It wasn't even a mattress really to keep me off the concrete. And I was there. It happened on a Wednesday, and Friday night they moved me, so I went to the cell 2 days later.
And prior to this, in our conversations, you had been up for 3 days. Were you, at that point, did you pass out cold and sleep most of that time?
What I remember, yeah. Like I said, those days, when you get locked down, there's no lights. I mean, your lights don't go off, and your days are the same. You figure that was good 50 hours or more, though. Nothing changed, so I probably slept on and off, woke up to eat or whatever. But that even started changing when I got locked down. Then the reality started setting in. You realize that what you did is not going to improve your situation by any stretch. You realize you're never getting out of there. Then you start thinking about how you brought shame on your family and basically thrown everything you've ever built in your life down the garbage chute, Then you start thinking about what can I do? Well, that's when other thoughts of I was suicidal for a few months. Mm-hmm. And they put me on bipolar medication and stuff to keep me semi-calm, I guess.
What was the bipolar medication they put you on?
Resperdal and Zoloft, I think.
Are you still on that?
No, I quit taking that in 2017. I took it for 2.5, 3 years, and I just got tired of the way it made me feel because it didn't improve nothing. It just kept me like a halfway zombie.
Did you have any problems
like that?
Did you have any problems coming off that, the antidepressants?
Not really, because I had really started focusing in 2017. I started writing a book, to be honest with you, because that gave me something to focus on until, I guess, the summer of 18, whenever that started working on my mind, because I started putting all these pieces together, how maybe I got played, And I found out, it was years after this woman died that I actually found out that she was dead, but it's like my wife told me. She said, "You've forgiven everybody in here that, that may have caused you to do this. You need to forgive yourself." So I started working on the spiritual side until 6 years ago this month, when I finally gave it up to the Father, and I let Him take that burden off me. He told me, "Throw that book away." I had written probably 200 or 300 pages already. But you know yourself, you can't profit from a crime you've done like that by writing. I was kind of like ghostwriting it to my wife, but that she passed away within months of this happening. So it wouldn't work anyway.
Okay. Can you take me back? I want to go back to this, your holding tank cell that you were in the very first day. The very first, I know that when people come down off of drugs, they sleep a lot in jail. I can attest to that in my time. When I was coming off of a methamphetamine binge, slept, I don't know how many days, 10 days in a row when I first got into jail. Now, what can you remember about your holding cell? What can you remember about your first food? What can you remember about your environment? Thinking about the first thoughts of being in jail, can you take me back to those emotions?
Oh, like I said, with that holding cell I was at, the camera's watching you because they don't know if you're going to try to kill yourself, I guess. And I was laying on looked like a big surfboard, kind of plastic. And I just remember eating and sleeping for those 2.5 days until I got my own cell. I'm sure that may have carried on, but that particular run was probably the longest run I'd been on. I was more like a weekend warrior. I wasn't a real hardcore because I had to work, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So the timing of everything, as I look back, this was like the perfect storm of events. And when you get a big fat 8-ball on Sunday, you know, you kind of party on that till the next Wednesday when it happened. So that's where I was at for that. And after I got into jail, I just remember them bringing me out one day because they drew blood. They put me in one of these crazy chairs where they got you all strapped down to go electrocute you, but all they're doing is keeping you moving. I think you know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And they did the blood draw. And like I said, I never talked to detectives after that. After they come to my cell in Tombstone and asked me if I could talk with them, I said, no, I don't think I will. I think I'm set up already. And I never saw another detective my whole time in jail.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it was
like I said, when I was being booked, that cop asked me if I was that guy from Tombstone. I responded to him, and that's the only time I've really spoken to the police about what happened.
So,
of course, I had enough.
Good.
They had enough on me to convict me without me saying another word anyway.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, you were obviously convicted of this without ever, you know, having your story said, which is why I like to hear this story. Now, the 3 days, you probably don't remember the very first little bit, it sounds like, but then you get your own cell. And were you with anyone else? Did it have what they call, I guess I used to call a stainless steel stallion toilet that had the sink attached to it? Tell me about your first cell and your memories of all of this.
Well, it was a 2-man cell. I remember that. But, of course, since I was in the maximum security pod, it was, you know, single. I had my own cell because of the charges against me. And at night, whenever they would lock you down, I remember that's when the weird stuff would start happening. Now, when I thought it was a supernatural thing. I thought it was a woman, because she was a witch, was casting a spell on me. I actually had a spell in my wallet when I was arrested. I didn't even know it was in it. That's a story in itself. But
now, what woman are you? What woman are you talking about that was a witch?
The one that was between me and the other man.
That one was a witch.
The one that was raped.
She was a witch as well.
Yes. Well, she worked at the Bird's Cage Theater. She did the ghost tours at night. She did the seances.
Okay, and so you
talked to the spirits in the birdcage.
So both of you guys were essentially talking to spirits together. Did you ever do this together?
Yes. We went to the grave. We've been to a couple places in Tombstone. In the graveyard, when I started getting into the romantic side. So I cut that off and started ghost hunting with a couple of Mormon sisters. I called them my ghost gals. I was the ghost bear.
What is a ghost bear?
Well, I go by bear, so I was the lead investigator, so I was ghost bear, and my ghost gals were my co-investigators.
Okay. All right. So we'll go into that because I definitely have a question regarding the woman and the romance in the graveyard. But let's stay on this particular piece here. So you're in your cell and you're in maximum security, and so you're there. Did you had a copy of your charges? Were you reading them at that time?
I would get just little bits and pieces. I have very little paperwork on the transcripts of the interviews and stuff like that. I only met my lawyer once, and she was very, I don't even know what word I use, but she basically was telling me that I got what I wanted. And I said, yeah, I got what to do. she told me, well, they're not going for the death penalty. They're only going for natural life. So I said, oh, that's great. She was very nonchalant, so I only saw her one time. After that was a paralegal would bring me little bits and pieces. I hear taped interviews and maybe get a transcript here and there, some interviews they did.
Okay.
But I saw very quickly that people embellish the stories, of course, and tell things that didn't need me telling. I found out this lady had done all kind of talking that wasn't even related to this, trying to incriminate. She was making a smoke screen to hide what she had done. It just, over the years, I started putting this all together, and it was probably a bit of conspiracy from the beginning that, it's just, but me and him both were victims probably in the end.
Mm-hmm. All right, so it sounds a little strange, but I mean, you only saw like one attorney all the way to your trial. I mean, did you even have a trial, or did you just plead guilty?
No, the woman that was threatening me, my attorney, I only saw that first time that I've been in jail for like 2 weeks in. Then I basically was telling her that about these, I was experiencing all this supernatural stuff. And some people don't believe in that thing, and I kind of got upset and started banging on the door. I said, let me out of here. And she never come back. So I must have freaked her out a little bit.
So you scared the attorney away by talking about the supernatural?
Yeah, she thought I was trying to, I don't know. I said, well, I also believe in a God, and I think he's pretty supernatural. Apparently, she was an atheist the way she talked. But
all right, so you said the supernatural just started when you were in your cell. Explain what you're talking about with that.
Well, when the lights would go out, I'd feel stuff crawling on me, and I hear voices telling me to hang myself.
Mm-hmm. And this was what?
You have to remember, I was dealing with some pretty strange stuff for years, and I knew that there's a dimension right next to ours that can't be seen. It affects almost everything that we do, whether we realize it or not. So I kind of reverted to I cast a spell against her and had it mailed out. It had it delivered to her by someone that I trusted in Tombstone.
You put a spell on your attorney?
After that,
You put a spell on your attorney?
I gave it to no attorney. I wrote a letter to someone with a spell in it, and he threw it to her windshield. Wrapped in a brick. Got the message.
And this was because she never came back? Is that what you're saying?
I think she was trying to cast a spell so I'd hang myself so none of this would ever come out in a trial.
And so this was this paranoia that you were facing, or do you have any kind of ideas to this day what you think you were dealing with her?
Experience? I honestly believed that she was casting a spell where I would hear these entities trying to get me to kill myself. And I actually did get caught making the rope twice. The second time, I spent like 3 weeks and without special handling. The first time was just a few days, but the second time I got the rope already made, was thinking to kick myself off. After that, I didn't have no clothes for a few days, even.
Right, because they took everything away. Okay, so let me just.
You don't even have a blanket.
Yeah, right. So you thought your attorney was casting spells against you, and so you wanted to.
No, not my attorney.
Okay.
Not my attorney. The woman who was at the center between me and Leroy.
Oh, so okay, I got this. Okay, thank you. So this is where you were basically delivering a message to her. What kind of spell? What was this spell supposed to do? And for anyone listening, we're talking. Go ahead.
I just cast a spell to break the spell that she was casting against me. I was married to a witch years prior to this, back in the late 70s. She taught me witchcraft and how to read tarot and, incantations. And it's a lot of weird stuff out there in the occult. And whenever you're a paranormal investigator, you're doing necromancy anyway. You're speaking to the dead, which we're not supposed to do. And whenever you start calling entities to help you manipulate the natural through supernatural means, that's sorcery and witchcraft. So it had all kinds of supernatural things going on. So it's not outside the realm to believe that she was doing the same thing to try to get me to kill myself, so none of her involvement could be brought out in trial.
And she died. She died how long after after the rock went through the window? How long was it before she died?
2 years. She died of stomach cancer.
Stomach cancer. Okay, so do you think your spell to break the spell was effective? Do you think did anything stop after you did that?
Yeah, the stuff at night stopped, and I never tried to kill myself after that.
But at the time, you were still on those two drugs, the one of the antidepressants and then the other one. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. I was on those for a couple of years after I got out of jail.
And how long was it? I mean, how many days do you think it was before you wrote that note and had it thrown through her car that you were in jail?
Probably 2 or 3 months.
Okay.
It had gone on, and I tried to make my rope and got caught. And I started thinking, when we come back, I'll tell you what I did with a spell.
Okay.
It's kind of freaky.
All right.
Because it may have been more effective than I intended it to be.
Right. For everybody that's out there listening, because I got a little confused, I want to make sure everybody is up to understanding of exactly where we're at with this story. Barry did not throw a rock with a spell through his attorney's window. What he did was he threw it through the window of the woman who was involved, who basically said Lightning Leroy had raped her. So this is correct, right?
I wrote a friend of mine that had sent me a postcard in jail. He had done time too, so he knew how it was to be in jail. He had sent me a postcard, and I had his address, so I wrote him back because I knew I could trust him. So I wrote this spell and sent it to him, and he delivered it to her by putting it on a brick and throwing it through her windshield.
And without saying the spell, what was it? 4 words, 3 words? What is it, a whole bunch of words?
No, it was it's kind of like poetry. That's how I wrote mine anyway. It's probably 4 or 5 stanzas verses. But the key to it is it was signed with blood. And when I had a tattoo put on my wrist the last year on Tombstone. I called this lady Redbird because she had red hair. She called me Bear, and I called her Redbird. She had birds tattooed on her chest. Well, so whenever I had this feeling that she was trying to get me to kill myself, I said, well, I'm going to have to counteract this spell. So I wrote the spell, and I had a guy tattoo an arrow going through her bird tattoo on my wrist. The arrow sticks in the top of her head and comes out her butt, which is kind of strange since she died of stomach cancer. I'm not claiming that, but pretty interesting coincidence.
So
and the blood from the tattoo was signed on the spell that was mailed to her.
Okay, so you were able to write a letter from jail. You put the spell on it. You had somebody else, like a cellie, do a tattoo for you of an arrow.
I sent it back to my friend in Tombstone, and he went to her house one night and threw her windshield.
Okay, so how did he? So he put this letter on a brick.
Yeah,
like taped it.
I would assume he just wrapped it up in a brick with probably a rag or bandana on it, just threw it through her windshield. That was to let her know I was pretty angry, probably,
And she would have known your handwriting, correct?
Absolutely.
Did she call the cops about this?
Here's the thing. I had written a spell about 7 or 8 months prior to that. Basically was a love spell that it's really complicated. Unless you've been involved in the occult and with witchcraft, it sounds pretty stupid. But the scriptures that tell you that there's a lot of power on the dark side as well. We don't, fight against flesh and blood. We fight against, the unseen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a fact. But supernatural is just as real as the natural, that whether people want to admit it or not, it's a fact. And whenever you start dabbling in that, you start calling on the dark side, you're opening doors that can't be shut sometimes. And that's what took me years to say, well, what can I do in this? And I finally, 6 years ago in December, I just give it all up to Brother. He started seeing my sincerity. And honestly, brother, I started repenting the moment it happened.
You started what?
Not many people are going to turn themselves in like I did.
Right. Okay.
But I fell back into fighting fire with fire when I felt like he was trying to get me to hang myself by writing that last spell. That's the last time I've used witchcraft.
Okay. That's very interesting. So you are in jail 2 months, and then you decide to launch a spell-breaking attack on this lady. What was her name again? Laura. Right, and Laura. And so what happens after that? Do the voices stop? I guess. I feel like she knew that I knew what I was doing as well. Because, like I said, we ghost hunted together, and she actually broke another spell earlier that another witch had cast against me. Kind of broke up another witch with a friend of mine, because she was basically using my friend, and I said, man, you gotta get rid of that chick. She's walking on the dark side. She had a pentagram big as a basketball. It's one that I had my friend break up with. There's some pretty strange people in southern Arizona, brother. Yeah, it sounds like it. Now I think the occult thing is something totally for another side of it, and I think it's something that a lot of people really need to hear. How many months was it before you ended up going to trial? How long were you in the county jail before you had a trial or before you pled guilty?
My trial date come up 9 months later.
Okay.
And when I went to court that day, I had been given another lawyer of mail, and I met him one time before the trial date, and he basically said, well, you're basically screwed. I said, yeah, I know. So the day of trial, I told my attorney, I said, tell the judge I want to plead guilty today. And he said, what? I said, yeah. I said, I'm not going to drag my family into this, and my wife can testify and make all these people that were once my friends come in here and put them on stands and put them in that situation. I'm not going to get out of this. I've resigned myself to that the day it happened. But when you go to trial, you start bringing people in there and making them say things they don't want to say. Sometimes you're going to make them perjure themselves, and it was no use to open that can of worms.
So you pled guilty on that day. What did the judge say? How did that go down?
Well, he said, I don't really like doing this, but I will. And he looked over at the DA and said, did you offer him a plea deal? The DA said, be honest with you, Judge, a first-year law student could win this case against this man. Well, whenever you tell people the night before what you're going to do and give your stuff away out of your apartment, then to do the deed in front of 4 people, then turn yourself in, you pretty much, it's a slam dunk for a guilty plea. So it was never a plea deal. I just went in and said, yeah, I'm guilty, Your Honor. I accept natural life without possibility of parole. Now, I had, first-degree premeditated charges.
Was there an offer on the table for natural life in prison?
That was what they were going for. They were not going for the death penalty, which his family wasn't real happy about that. But had already seen that when you turn yourself in like that, you pretty much forgive anyway.
Yeah.
So I figured this guy's, he's probably going to plead out and just say he's guilty, and we're just going to send him to prison the rest of his life, which that was what's happened.
Okay, and what date did you plead guilty? Do you remember that date?
It was in March of 2015.
Mm-hmm. Well, how many days were you in county before you were shipped off to the state penitentiary?
Probably within a week or two, I was sent to Florence, Arizona, which is pretty close to Phoenix, which is probably 3 hours from where I was at. So easily within 10 months of this taking place in July, I was sitting in what's called the walls, which they've shut down, was one of the old prisons in Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
I was,
Now, were you, prior to going on the prison bus, were you strip searched, and had you been strip searched prior to this?
Yeah, many times.
So before the in-county jail, they actually strip searched you?
Oh, I was strip searched when I come in that night, of course, because everything I had on was taken away from it, and they strip searched me, then give me this, like I said, the classic horizontal strike, convict suit.
Mm-hmm.
And every time, since the charges I had, I could only go to rec, alone.
Right.
Plus, when I met myself to get a shower, I had waist chains and leg chains on, so I couldn't run or try to struggle.
Mm-hmm.
March 2015, I went to the state. I was in state custody then.
And how old were you at that point?
60.
Okay, and so you've essentially been in prison now for 19 years? Is that no? 10 years, yeah. 10. Okay, yeah, there we go. Yeah, my math sucks.
March next year will be 10 years in state custody.
State. And what, when this call ends on this, I think this is a ton of stuff that we need to compile on this, but Barry, you've been in there now for a long time. I mean, that's 10 years is a very long time. What kind of message can you give to the people out there in response to people that are going down this same road that you are? Because right now there's a very, very bad epidemic of drugs that are way beyond the stuff that you probably ever saw. And it's really just the synthetic drugs that are very, very cheap, and the people are walking around like zombies. What advice can you give to these guys?
I'm witnessing that in here, believe me.
Mm-hmm.
It's very sad.
It is very. It is.
The drug culture is, from when I started doing drugs in the 70s, it's completely different today.
Yep.
Today it's more about medicating than getting high than when I was young.
Right.
This is about tolerating your circumstances. People have lost all hope, in my opinion.
Yeah. And so for those,
they want to be zombies.
Yeah, and that is true.
They don't want to. I was trying to experience more, get more out of life by getting more sensation into life. Now it seems to be where people are trying to dull everything down. They're trying to get away from life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, everything's upside down, just like it says in Isaiah. Good's evil, and evil is called good. And everything's upside down.
And for these brothers and sisters that are out there that are hooked on some kind of amphetamine, that are hooked on this kind of stuff, what would you tell them from a guy on the inside? What can you tell them?
Well, I'm going to tell you right now that meth is the devil's. He loves it because it opens doors right to his house. And he'll come right in there and invite you in, and he won't let you go. So if you want to meet him face to face, just keep doing meth, and he'll show up.
Awesome.
And like I said, this stuff nowadays, I don't know what some of this stuff is. I think it's called spice or something.
Yeah.
It's like an epileptic seizure to me.
Yeah, it's not good. Thank you very, very much for talking. Thank you very much for being part of this podcast and being part of Behind the Bars. Much love to you, brother.